"Hey rookie, coffee machine is broken. Congratulations on your first assignment." The laughter came fast. A few officers chuckled from behind their desks. Someone near the back let out a whistle. Another officer shook his head and grinned as though the joke had already become the best part of the morning. Marcus Reed stood just inside the front doors of the precinct, one hand resting on the strap of a small duffel bag. He had arrived exactly at 7 a.m. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with old paper, floor cleaner, and the faint static sound of police radios echoing through the building. Morning sunlight filtered through the front windows and stretched across the worn tile floor. Marcus looked toward the source of the comment. Sergeant Ethan Walker leaned against a desk with his arms crossed. His uniform was immaculate. His confidence filled the room. Around him stood officers who clearly followed his lead. Marcus offered a small smile. "Good morning to you too." More laughter followed. Ethan glanced at the name tag on Marcus's uniform. "Reed. First day." Marcus nodded. "That is right." Ethan pointed toward a break room down the hall. "Coffee machine is in there. If you can survive that, maybe we will trust you with something important later." The room laughed again. Marcus simply nodded. "I will keep that in mind." He did not sound offended. That seemed to confuse a few people. Most rookies either laughed nervously or tried to prove themselves. Marcus did neither. He simply walked toward the break room at an easy pace. As he disappeared around the corner, one young officer leaned toward Ethan. "He is pretty calm." Ethan shrugged. "Give it a week. They all start calm." Inside the break room, Marcus studied the machine for less than 30 seconds before locating the problem. A loose connection. Nothing serious. He fixed it quietly and poured himself a cup. Through the doorway he could hear conversations drifting from the main office. Officers discussing schedules. Detectives reviewing reports. Dispatch calls crackling through speakers. Marcus listened carefully, not because he was curious, because he was observant. He returned carrying his coffee. The machine was working again. Several officers noticed immediately. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Lucky guess." Marcus took a sip. "Not really." Ethan smirked. "Confident." Marcus smiled politely. "Experienced." That answer earned a few looks. Ethan laughed. "Experienced at what?" Marcus glanced around the room. Desks were cluttered. Case files sat in uneven stacks. A bulletin board displayed outdated notices. One patrol schedule had been posted incorrectly. He noticed all of it within seconds. "Paying attention," Marcus replied. Ethan shook his head. "You are going to fit in just fine, rookie." The word rookie echoed again through the room. Marcus did not correct him. He simply walked toward an empty desk near the back corner and sat down. For the next hour he quietly reviewed orientation materials. Officers moved around him without paying much attention. Yet Marcus noticed everything. The detective who skipped breakfast. The dispatcher covering for a sick coworker. The young patrol officer nervous about an upcoming evaluation. Small details revealed larger stories. Around 8:15 a.m., the precinct commander stepped out of his office carrying a folder. He scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on Marcus. For a fraction of a second, surprise crossed his face. Then it disappeared. Marcus gave the slightest nod. The commander returned it before continuing down the hallway. Nobody else seemed to notice. But Marcus did. And somewhere deep inside the station, the first tiny crack appeared in a story everyone thought they already understood. Marcus Reed spent the next hour at the small desk near the back of the precinct, quietly reading orientation materials while the station moved around him like a machine running on habit. Phones rang. Radios crackled. Officers drifted in and out carrying reports and coffee cups. The morning energy felt familiar to him, though nobody in the room realized just how familiar. Sergeant Ethan Walker certainly did not. Around 9 a.m., Ethan walked across the room carrying a clipboard and stopped beside Marcus's desk. "Rookie, you busy?" Marcus looked up. "Not at the moment." Ethan handed him a stack of inventory sheets nearly 2 inches thick. "Good. Supply room audit. Every item gets counted. Every shelf gets checked. Exciting stuff." Several nearby officers smirked. One detective laughed under his breath. Marcus accepted the clipboard. Where is the supply room? Ethan pointed down a hallway. Basement level. Try not to get lost. More laughter followed. Marcus simply stood and headed toward the stairs. The basement smelled faintly of cardboard, cleaning supplies and old concrete. Rows of shelves stretched across the room beneath fluorescent lights. Most officers would have viewed the assignment as punishment. Marcus treated it like any other responsibility. He moved carefully through each aisle, checking labels, examining inventory records, and comparing them against the digital system. Within 20 minutes he noticed something unusual. Several emergency response kits listed in the database were not physically present. Other items had been logged under incorrect locations. Nothing dangerous, nothing urgent, but enough to create confusion during an emergency. Marcus made notes and continued working. Upstairs, Ethan gathered several officers around a central desk. How long before the rookie realizes I gave him the most boring assignment in the building? A patrol officer laughed. Probably 10 minutes. Another shrugged. He does not seem bothered. Ethan glanced toward the stairwell. Give him time. Yet time passed and Marcus never complained. Shortly before noon, he returned carrying the completed inventory sheets. Ethan looked surprised. Finished already? Marcus handed over the clipboard. Mostly. Ethan flipped through the pages. His amusement slowly faded. Every discrepancy had been highlighted. Every missing item documented. Every database error identified. Several officers leaned closer. One detective frowned. Wait a second. We have been trying to track those inventory problems for months. Marcus nodded. The errors follow a pattern. Ethan looked up. A pattern. Marcus pointed to a section of the report. The software update from last year appears to have transferred certain records into duplicate categories. Items were not actually missing. They were logged twice under different locations. Silence settled briefly around the desk. The detective quickly scanned the report again. That actually makes sense. Marcus offered a polite smile. I thought so. Ethan folded the clipboard. Something in his expression changed. Not respect. Not yet. But curiosity. Before he could ask another question, the precinct commander emerged from his office again. This time he paused completely when he saw Marcus standing beside Ethan. For a brief moment, the commander looked as though he wanted to say something. Instead he simply nodded. Good work on the inventory audit. Marcus returned the nod. Thank you, sir. The commander continued walking. Several officers exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan stared after him. The commander rarely noticed inventory reports. Yet somehow he already knew Marcus had completed the assignment. As conversations resumed around the room, Ethan found himself watching the quiet rookie a little more carefully than before. And for the second time that day, he began wondering whether there was more to Marcus Reed than anyone had been told. There was more to Marcus Reed than anyone had been told. By early afternoon, that quiet realization had begun circulating through the precinct, even if nobody said it aloud. The station settled into its usual rhythm as sunlight shifted across desks covered with reports, coffee cups, and patrol schedules. Officers moved between briefing rooms and workstations while dispatch calls echoed from speakers overhead. Marcus remained at his desk near the back corner, reviewing department manuals with the same calm focus he had shown all morning. He never rushed. He never tried to draw attention to himself. Yet somehow people kept noticing him anyway. Sergeant Ethan Walker stood near the operations board studying assignments for the evening shift. Every few minutes his eyes drifted toward Marcus. The rookie did not fit the pattern. Most new officers spent their first day trying to impress everyone. Marcus seemed perfectly comfortable letting people underestimate him. That bothered Ethan more than he wanted to admit. Around 1:30 p.m., a minor scheduling issue emerged. A patrol unit had been assigned overlapping coverage zones, leaving another district unexpectedly uncovered during a busy period. Several supervisors gathered around the board attempting to reorganize the assignments. Voices remained professional but increasingly frustrated. The mistake should have been simple to solve. Instead, it created a chain reaction affecting multiple teams. Marcus watched quietly from his desk. He listened for several minutes before returning to his paperwork. Ethan noticed. "You look like you have an opinion." Several officers glanced toward Marcus. He looked up. "Just an observation." Ethan folded his arms. "Let us hear it." Marcus stood and approached the board. The room grew slightly quieter. He studied the schedule for less than 10 seconds. Then he pointed toward a section near the middle. "The problem is not here." Ethan frowned. "Where is it?" Marcus traced a finger toward an earlier assignment block. Coverage was reduced in District 3 during the morning shift because of training. The software compensated automatically and carried the adjustment into the afternoon schedule. One supervisor blinked. "That is exactly when the problem started." Marcus nodded. "If you restore the original coverage assignment, everything else balances itself." Ethan stared at the board. Another supervisor entered a few commands into the scheduling system. Seconds later, the conflict disappeared. Every assignment aligned correctly. Silence settled across the room. One officer let out a low whistle. "How did you see that so fast?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Patterns tend to repeat themselves." The answer only deepened the mystery. Ethan studied him carefully. The man standing beside the board did not look surprised by the solution. He looked as though he had solved similar problems many times before. Before Ethan could ask another question, a civilian administrator named Linda Perez entered carrying several personnel files. She stopped abruptly when she noticed Marcus. For a brief second, her expression changed. Not shock exactly. Recognition. She glanced at the name tag on his uniform. Then she looked again. Marcus offered a polite nod. Linda quickly returned it before continuing toward her office. Ethan noticed the exchange immediately. So did a few others. Later that afternoon, Linda passed Marcus in the hallway and seemed on the verge of saying something before changing her mind. Marcus continued walking as though nothing had happened. Yet the questions inside the precinct continued growing. The quiet rookie kept solving problems nobody expected him to solve. Supervisors seemed unusually aware of his presence. And now even administrative staff appeared to recognize his name. By the time the afternoon briefing approached, more than one person had begun wondering the same thing. Who exactly was Marcus Reed? Who exactly was Marcus Reed? By the time the afternoon briefing began, that question lingered quietly throughout the precinct. Nobody asked it directly. Police officers were trained observers. They preferred gathering evidence before drawing conclusions. Yet the evidence surrounding Marcus seemed to grow stranger with every passing hour. The briefing room slowly filled as officers carried notebooks, coffee cups, and tablets into rows of seats facing a large presentation screen. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Marcus entered with the rest of the group and selected a seat near the back wall. As always, he avoided attention. Sergeant Ethan Walker noticed immediately. Most new officers sat near the front in an effort to impress supervisors. Marcus seemed content simply watching and listening. The afternoon briefing began normally. Patrol assignments were reviewed. Community events were discussed. Traffic concerns for the upcoming weekend appeared on the screen. Officers took notes while supervisors outlined expectations for the next several days. Then an unexpected issue emerged. A regional communications update scheduled for the following month appeared to contain conflicting implementation dates. Two supervisors disagreed about which schedule had been approved by headquarters. The discussion remained professional but increasingly confusing. Different documents seemed to support different conclusions. Ethan finally rubbed his forehead and sighed. "We have been arguing about this for 2 weeks." Several officers laughed. One supervisor shook his head. "Nobody can get a straight answer." Marcus quietly glanced at the documents displayed on the screen. He studied them for a few seconds. Then he lowered his eyes again. Ethan noticed. "You see something?" The room turned toward Marcus. He hesitated briefly. "Maybe." Ethan leaned back. "Go ahead." Marcus stood slowly. He walked toward the screen and pointed to a reference number buried near the bottom of one document. This implementation schedule was revised 3 months ago. One supervisor frowned. "No, it was not." Marcus pointed again. "The revision code indicates it was incorporated into the regional modernization plan." Silence followed. Several people leaned closer. Another supervisor quickly searched through the digital files. After a few moments, his eyes widened. He is right. The room became quiet. How did you know that? Someone asked. Marcus offered a small smile. The coding format changed during a statewide update several years ago. Ethan stared at him. Most people would never notice that. Marcus shrugged. Most people do not spend much time reading administrative reports. Laughter moved through the room. Yet something about the answer felt incomplete. The room sensed it. Marcus returned to his seat. The briefing continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Officers exchanged subtle glances. The rookie continued displaying knowledge that did not match his position. Near the end of the meeting, Lieutenant Robert Hayes entered unexpectedly carrying a folder. He approached the front of the room and quietly handed the folder to the precinct commander. The commander opened it and briefly scanned the contents. His eyes lifted toward Marcus. Again, for the third time that day. This time Ethan noticed the look clearly. Respect. Not ordinary respect. The kind reserved for someone important. The commander immediately closed the folder and continued the briefing as though nothing had happened. But Ethan could not ignore what he had seen. Later, as officers filed out of the room, Ethan stopped Lieutenant Hayes near the doorway. Everything okay? Hayes nodded. Fine. Ethan glanced toward Marcus walking down the hallway. You know that rookie? Hayes followed his gaze. For a fraction of a second, amusement appeared on the lieutenant's face. Then it vanished. You could say that. Before Ethan could ask another question, Hayes walked away. Ethan remained standing in the hallway, watching Marcus disappear around the corner. For the first time all day, the confidence he usually carried so easily began giving way to uncertainty. Somewhere inside the precinct, a story was unfolding that he did not understand. And he was starting to realize he might be one of the last people to figure it out. The afternoon continued beneath a growing cloud of unanswered questions. Outside the precinct windows, the sun drifted lower across the city skyline. Inside, the station remained busy. Officers prepared reports, reviewed patrol routes, and handled routine calls. Yet beneath the normal activity, a subtle shift had taken place. Marcus Reed was no longer invisible. People still called him the rookie. They still joked when he walked by. But now those jokes carried uncertainty. Nobody could explain how a first-day officer knew so much about scheduling systems, administrative procedures, and operational protocols. Nobody could explain why supervisors seemed to recognize him. And nobody could explain why Marcus himself never appeared surprised by anything. Around 3 p.m., a problem emerged that quickly drew attention throughout the precinct. A communications terminal used to coordinate regional information suddenly stopped updating properly. New entries appeared delayed. Several status reports failed to synchronize. The issue was not critical, but it immediately disrupted workflow across multiple desks. Officers gathered around the workstation while civilian staff attempted to identify the cause. Frustration slowly spread through the room. Not again, one officer muttered. This happened last month. Another shook his head. Technology always waits for the busiest day. Ethan Walker joined the growing crowd. He studied the screen and frowned. Can anyone fix it? Nobody answered. The communications specialist assigned to the station was out of the office that day. For several minutes, people tried different solutions without success. Marcus remained seated at his desk nearby. He listened quietly while reviewing paperwork. Eventually, one dispatcher noticed him. Maybe the rookie has another miracle for us. A few officers laughed. Ethan looked toward Marcus. You got any ideas? Marcus hesitated. Possibly. The room immediately grew interested. Ethan gestured toward the terminal. Go ahead. Marcus approached the workstation. He examined the screen without touching anything. Then he looked toward the server status panel displayed in a corner window. A few seconds passed. The terminal is not the problem, he said. Ethan folded his arms. Then what is? Marcus pointed toward a network routing indicator. The backup server activated automatically during a maintenance check. The system is trying to communicate through two pathways at the same time. Several employees stared at him. One dispatcher blinked. How do you even know that? Marcus smiled slightly, because the error code references the old regional architecture. Ethan shook his head slowly. You keep saying things that should not make sense. Marcus remained calm. Sometimes things make sense if you have seen them before. The statement lingered in the air. Ethan watched as Marcus guided a dispatcher through several settings. Within moments, the updates resumed. Information flowed normally across every terminal. The room erupted in relieved conversation. Yet the real focus was no longer the computer system. It was Marcus. A few desks away, Linda Perez sat frozen in front of a personnel database. She had spent part of the afternoon searching records. At first she thought she was mistaken. Then she searched again. And again. Each result led to the same conclusion. Linda stared at the screen in disbelief. A photograph appeared beside a personnel profile. The name beneath it read Marcus Reed. Her eyes widened. She immediately looked across the room toward him. Marcus happened to glance in her direction. For a brief moment their eyes met. He knew she had found something. Linda quickly closed the database window. Her heart raced. Across the precinct, conversations continued as normal. Nobody else noticed. Nobody else understood. But for the first time that day, someone finally knew exactly who Marcus Reed was. And the realization left her completely speechless. The realization left Linda Perez completely speechless. She remained seated at her desk long after the database window disappeared from her screen. Around her, the precinct continued operating normally. Phones rang. Officers exchanged reports. Radios crackled with routine updates. Yet everything suddenly felt different. Linda looked across the room toward Marcus Reed. He sat quietly reviewing paperwork as though nothing unusual had happened. As though his name did not carry significance throughout law enforcement circles across the state. Linda had attended conferences. She had seen photographs. She had heard stories from supervisors discussing leadership programs and departmental reforms. The face in the personnel file was unmistakable. Marcus Reed was not a rookie. Not even close. But if he wanted people to know, he would have told them. Linda understood that immediately. She said nothing. Across the room, Marcus continued working. A young officer named Tyler Brooks sat at the desk beside him. Tyler was only 23 years old and had joined the department less than a year earlier. Unlike some of the others, he had never mocked Marcus. Mostly because he spent too much time worrying about his own performance. That afternoon, Tyler stared at a report on his computer with growing frustration. He deleted a sentence. Rewrote it. Deleted it again. Marcus noticed without looking directly at him. Everything okay? Tyler sighed. Probably. Marcus smiled. That does not sound convincing. Tyler rubbed his forehead. I am preparing for my first evaluation next week. Marcus nodded. And? Tyler hesitated. I keep feeling like everyone else knows what they are doing. A faint laugh escaped Marcus. They do not. Tyler looked surprised. Really? Marcus leaned back slightly. Most people spend their careers learning. The confident ones simply get better at hiding it. Tyler laughed for the first time all day. The tension in his shoulders eased. Marcus glanced at the report on the screen. May I offer a suggestion? Tyler nodded immediately. Marcus reviewed the document for a few moments. Then he pointed toward several sections. You are describing events correctly. Tyler frowned. That is good, right? It is. Marcus smiled. But reports are not only records of what happened. They explain why decisions were made. Tyler studied the page again. Understanding slowly appeared on his face. So I should focus more on reasoning? Marcus nodded. Exactly. Tyler made several revisions. The report immediately became clearer. More confident. More professional. Tyler stared at the screen. That is actually a lot better. Marcus smiled. You already knew how to write it. Tyler shook his head. No. You showed me. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. Yet several nearby officers noticed it. More importantly, they noticed Tyler's reaction afterward. He looked relieved. Encouraged. Better. Later, as the shift continued, Tyler quietly shared the experience with another officer. Then another. Before long, people were discussing something new about Marcus. It was no longer just his knowledge. It was the way he helped others without making them feel small. Near the end of the afternoon, Ethan Walker passed Tyler's desk. "You seem happier than usual." Tyler smiled. "Marcus helped me with my report." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "The rookie." Tyler nodded. "He is really good at explaining things." Ethan glanced across the room. Marcus was once again sitting quietly by himself. No audience. No attention. No attempt to impress anyone. Yet somehow people kept walking away from conversations with him feeling more capable than before. Ethan watched him for several seconds. Something about that felt strangely familiar. Leadership. Real leadership. The kind that made other people stronger. The thought unsettled him. Because the more he observed Marcus read, the harder it became to believe the story everyone had accepted that morning. And somewhere deep inside the precinct, the truth was moving steadily closer to the surface. The truth was moving steadily closer to the surface. Outside the precinct, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, the station had grown quieter. Some officers were already on patrol. Others were finishing paperwork before the evening shift began. The energy had changed since morning. Conversations still flowed through the room, but now Marcus Reed's name appeared more often than anyone realized. Not openly. Not directly. Just enough to reveal growing curiosity. Linda Perez sat alone in her office reviewing personnel files she had already memorized. Every instinct told her to say something. Yet another part of her understood why Marcus had remained silent. Whatever was happening, it was intentional. He was letting people reveal themselves. Across the room, Marcus remained focused on his work. He seemed completely unaffected by the attention gradually surrounding him. Around 4:30 p.m., a young civilian employee named Rachel stepped into the records department carrying a stack of folders. Rachel had worked at the precinct for nearly 5 years. She knew most officers by name. As she passed Marcus's desk, she stopped unexpectedly. "Excuse me," she said. Marcus looked up. "Yes." Rachel hesitated. "Have we met before?" Marcus smiled politely. "I do not believe so." Rachel studied his face for a moment. Something seemed familiar. Not personally familiar. Professionally familiar. She could not place it. "Sorry," she said. "You just look familiar." Marcus nodded. "That happens sometimes." Rachel laughed softly and continued walking. Yet the feeling stayed with her. Later, while organizing archive department newsletters, she stumbled across an old photograph from a statewide leadership conference. Several senior law enforcement officials stood together on a stage receiving recognition. Rachel's eyes widened. There he was. The same calm smile. The same face. Marcus Reed. Her heart skipped. She looked back toward the main office through the glass partition. Marcus sat exactly where he had been all afternoon, quietly helping Tyler review another report. Rachel immediately turned to Linda's office. The moment their eyes met, neither woman needed to say anything. They both knew. Meanwhile, Ethan Walker was experiencing a different kind of realization. He had spent years working under various commanders. Some were respected. Others were merely tolerated. But one quality always separated great leaders from average ones. Great leaders improved the people around them. Throughout the day, Ethan had watched officers leave conversations with Marcus feeling more confident, more capable, and more motivated. That observation continued bothering him. Shortly before the end of the shift, Ethan walked toward the break room and found Marcus alone pouring a cup of coffee. The machine Marcus had repaired that morning continued working perfectly. Ethan leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." Ethan studied him carefully. "You have been in law enforcement before, have you not?" Marcus smiled slightly. "What makes you ask?" Ethan laughed. "Because nobody solves inventory problems, scheduling conflicts, communication issues, and report writing questions on their first day." Marcus stirred his coffee. "Experience helps." Ethan shook his head. "That is the most mysterious answer I have ever heard." For the first time all day, Marcus laughed. Not loudly, just enough to reveal warmth behind his calm exterior. Ethan found himself smiling too. The conversation lasted only a minute before Marcus returned to work. Yet something important had changed. Ethan no longer saw him as a rookie. He simply did not know what else to call him. Across the precinct, Rachel and Linda exchanged nervous glances. Both women understood that the secret could not remain hidden much longer. Somewhere in the building, preparations were already beginning for a meeting scheduled the following morning. And when that meeting arrived, the story everyone believed about Marcus Reed was about to change forever. The story everyone believed about Marcus Reed was about to change forever. The evening shift arrived as daylight faded beyond the precinct windows. Warm orange reflections stretched across the glass before slowly giving way to the cooler glow of overhead lights. Most officers settled into routine tasks, unaware that conversations had already begun behind closed office doors. Marcus remained exactly as he had been all day, calm, observant, and focused on his work. If he felt any anticipation about the following morning, he did not show it. Around 6 p.m., a department-wide email appeared in every employee inbox. Mandatory assembly. Main briefing room. 8 o'clock the next morning. Attendance required. No explanation accompanied the notice. That alone was unusual. The message immediately became the subject of speculation. Officers glanced up from their computers. Detectives stepped out of offices to compare theories. Dispatchers exchanged curious looks. Ethan Walker read the email twice before leaning back in his chair. "That is strange," he muttered. Nearby officers agreed. Mandatory meetings usually came with at least some indication of purpose. Budget announcements. Leadership updates. Policy changes. This one contained nothing. Across the room, Marcus read the same email. Then he simply returned to his report. Ethan noticed. "You are not curious?" Marcus looked up. "About tomorrow?" Ethan nodded. Marcus smiled. "I am sure we will all find out soon enough." The answer sounded harmless. Yet something about it lingered in Ethan's mind. Later that evening, Tyler Brooks approached Marcus carrying another report. Unlike earlier in the day, he no longer seemed nervous. "Do you have a minute?" Marcus nodded. For the next 15 minutes, they reviewed the document together. Marcus never rewrote anything himself. Instead, he asked questions. Why was this decision made? What information was available at the time? What outcome was expected? Slowly, Tyler corrected the report on his own. When he finished, he smiled. "You should teach." Marcus laughed softly. "Every good officer teaches." Tyler considered that for a moment. "Who taught you?" Marcus stared briefly toward the darkening windows. "A lot of people." It was a simple answer. Yet it carried the weight of experience. Nearby, Ethan overheard part of the exchange. Again he felt that same strange sensation. Marcus never spoke like someone trying to prove his value. He spoke like someone who already understood it. Meanwhile, Linda Perez sat quietly in her office. The secret she carried felt heavier with every passing hour. Twice she nearly told someone. Twice she stopped herself. Marcus deserved the chance to reveal himself on his own terms. Still, keeping silent was becoming increasingly difficult. Shortly before the end of the shift, the precinct commander emerged from his office and walked directly toward Marcus. Conversations throughout the room slowed. The commander stopped beside his desk. "Mr. Reed." Several heads turned immediately. Ethan noticed the choice of words. Not Officer Reed. Not Rookie. Mr. Reed. The commander smiled politely. "Thank you for your assistance today." Marcus stood. "Happy to help." The commander nodded. "I look forward to tomorrow." For a brief moment, complete silence settled over the room. Then the commander returned to his office. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ethan stared after him. His pulse quickened slightly. The pieces were finally beginning to connect, though the full picture remained hidden. As the shift ended and officers prepared to leave for the night, Marcus gathered his small duffel bag and headed toward the exit. The station lights reflected softly against the glass doors as he stepped outside. Behind him, dozens of unanswered questions lingered inside the building. Ahead of him waited a morning that would change everything. Ahead of him waited a morning that would change everything. Marcus Reed arrived at the precinct the next day at exactly 7:15 a.m. The sky was still pale with early morning light, and a cool breeze moved through the parking lot as officers began arriving for the mandatory assembly. Inside the building, conversations started before people even reached their desks. Nobody knew why every employee had been ordered to attend. Rumors spread through the hallways. Some believed a major restructuring was coming. Others expected budget cuts or leadership changes. The uncertainty filled every corner of the station. Ethan Walker entered carrying a cup of coffee and immediately noticed something unusual. The conference room had been prepared differently. Extra chairs had been arranged near the front. Fresh, bottled water sat on a table beside the podium. Even more surprising, members of city administration were expected to attend. That almost never happened. Ethan stopped near Tyler Brooks. "Have you heard anything?" Tyler shook his head. "Nothing. Everybody is guessing." Ethan glanced across the room. Marcus sat quietly near the back wall reviewing a folder. Unlike everyone else, he seemed completely relaxed. That detail bothered Ethan more than he cared to admit. At 7:45 a.m., employees began filing into the main briefing room. The atmosphere felt different from any meeting Ethan could remember. Detectives sat beside patrol officers. Civilian employees filled rows normally reserved for supervisors. Dispatch personnel arrived carrying notebooks. Linda Perez and Rachel exchanged nervous glances before taking their seats. Both women already knew more than anyone else in the room, yet neither spoke a word. Marcus entered a few minutes later and selected a chair near the center. No special treatment. No reserved seat. No effort to stand out. Several officers noticed him and quietly nodded. The respect he had earned over a single day was beginning to show. At exactly 8 a.m., the precinct commander stepped to the podium. Conversations faded immediately. The room became silent. "Thank you all for attending." He paused and looked around the room. "Today marks an important transition for this department." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The commander rarely sounded this formal. Over the past year, city leadership conducted a nationwide search for an individual capable of guiding this department into its next chapter. Several officers exchanged curious looks. The commander continued. "We sought experience, integrity, professionalism, and a proven commitment to serving both officers and community members." Ethan glanced toward Marcus almost without thinking. To his surprise, Marcus remained completely calm. Then the commander smiled. "Before I continue, I would like to welcome several guests." The doors at the rear of the room opened. City officials entered. Members of the mayor's office followed. Senior administrators from regional law enforcement agencies took seats. Near the front, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Officers sat straighter. Conversation stopped completely. Ethan stared at the unexpected visitors. None of this made sense. Why would regional leadership attend a local precinct meeting? Near the front row, Linda lowered her eyes. Rachel folded her hands tightly together. They knew the answer was seconds away. The commander waited until every guest was seated. Then he opened a folder and looked toward the audience. For a brief moment his eyes settled on Marcus Reed. Not casually, not accidentally, directly. Ethan followed his gaze. A strange feeling moved through the room. Dozens of people noticed the same thing at exactly the same time. The commander smiled. "There is one final person I would like everyone to meet properly." Across the briefing room, Marcus slowly closed his folder and looked up. And in that instant, every unanswered question from the previous day suddenly felt very close to being answered. Every unanswered question from the previous day suddenly felt very close to being answered. The briefing room remained completely silent. More than 100 eyes followed the precinct commander's gaze toward Marcus Reed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning felt louder than before. Marcus sat calmly in his chair, one hand resting on the closed folder in front of him. There was no sign of nervousness, no surprise, no anticipation, only the same quiet confidence he had carried since the moment he walked through the precinct doors. The commander smiled warmly. "Please stand, Mr. Reed." For a brief second nobody moved. Then Marcus rose to his feet. Chairs creaked softly throughout the room as officers adjusted in their seats. Ethan Walker felt his pulse quicken. The formality in the commander's voice confirmed what he had begun suspecting. This was no ordinary introduction. The commander stepped away from the podium. "Many of you spent yesterday working alongside Mr. Reed." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. The commander nodded. That was intentional. The room immediately became silent again. Ethan's stomach tightened. Linda lowered her eyes. Rachel folded her hands together even more tightly. The commander continued. For the past 12 months, city leadership and regional officials have conducted one of the most extensive executive selection processes in department history. Several city administrators nodded from the front row. The individuals selected demonstrated exceptional leadership, operational expertise, community engagement, organizational reform experience, and a record of strengthening every department he has served. Ethan could no longer look away from Marcus. Around him, officers exchanged confused glances. Some were beginning to understand. Others were still trying to fit the pieces together. The commander opened the folder in his hands. Mr. Reed has spent more than 20 years in law enforcement leadership. A wave of surprise moved through the room. Several officers visibly straightened in their seats. The commander continued. He has led regional task forces, coordinated statewide modernization programs, and advised departments across multiple jurisdictions. Tyler Brooks stared at Marcus in disbelief. The man who had patiently helped him write reports the day before had never once mentioned any of it. Not a single accomplishment. Not a single title. Not a single hint. The commander smiled. Yesterday was not his first day in law enforcement. A few quiet laughs broke the tension. Then the commander delivered the sentence that changed everything. Yesterday was his first day observing the department he will now lead. Complete silence followed. It was the kind of silence that seemed to stop time itself. Ethan felt the words hit him like a wave. Around the room, expressions shifted from confusion to shock. Marcus remained standing, calm and composed. The commander looked directly toward him. Effective immediately, I am honored to introduce your new department commander, Commander Marcus Reed. For a moment nobody reacted. The announcement seemed almost too large to process. Then city officials began applauding. Regional administrators followed. One by one the room joined them. The applause grew louder and louder until it filled every corner of the briefing room. Marcus accepted it. With quiet humility. No triumphant smile. No display of authority. Just gratitude. Ethan sat frozen in his chair. Images from the previous day flooded through his mind. The coffee machine joke. The inventory assignment. The comments. The assumptions. Every moment replayed with painful clarity. Across the room, Tyler shook his head in amazement. Linda finally allowed herself a small smile. Rachel exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for hours. When the applause finally faded, Marcus stepped toward the podium. The room immediately became silent once more. Every officer leaned forward slightly. They expected a speech about authority, about rank, about leadership. Instead, Marcus looked across the room with calm eyes and said something nobody expected. Yesterday taught me a great deal about this department, and I am grateful for every conversation I had. The humility in his voice only deepened the impact of the revelation, because at that moment everyone understood the same thing. The man they had underestimated possessed far more power than they ever imagined. Yet he had spent his first day using that power to help others instead of proving himself. The briefing room remained silent after Marcus finished speaking. The impact of the revelation still hung in the air. Officers who had spent the previous day joking with him now looked at him through an entirely different lens. Some appeared embarrassed. Others seemed stunned. A few simply sat motionless, trying to reconcile the humble man they had worked beside with the accomplished commander now standing at the podium. Marcus allowed the silence to settle naturally before continuing. Leadership is not something a title creates, he said calmly. Leadership is something people earn through trust. His voice was steady and measured. Every word felt deliberate. Yesterday, many of you showed me what kind of department this can become. I saw officers helping one another. I saw employees solving problems together. I saw people who genuinely care about serving their community. Several officers exchanged surprised glances. They had expected criticism. Instead, Marcus was highlighting their strengths. Every organization has challenges, he continued. That is normal. What matters is whether we face those challenges together. Ethan Walker lowered his eyes. The weight in his chest had grown heavier with every passing minute. The memories refused to leave him alone. The jokes. The assumptions. The way he had treated Marcus before knowing who he was. Looking back, none of it felt good. What bothered him most was not the fact that Marcus had been the new commander. It was the realization that Marcus deserved respect long before anyone knew his title. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. City officials spoke about future initiatives. Regional administrators discussed upcoming programs. Yet Ethan barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on Marcus. The more he listened, the more he understood why this man had been selected. Marcus spoke about accountability without sounding harsh. He spoke about standards without sounding superior. He spoke about teamwork as though every person in the room mattered equally. When the meeting finally concluded, employees slowly began standing from their seats. Conversations erupted immediately. Some officers gathered in small groups, still processing the announcement. Others approached city officials with questions. Tyler Brooks smiled broadly as he shook his head in disbelief. "I cannot believe it," he whispered. Nearby, Linda and Rachel shared a relieved look. The secret was finally out. Ethan remained seated. For a long moment he watched people surround Marcus. Congratulations. Handshakes. Introductions. Through it all, Marcus remained exactly the same person he had been the day before. Patient. Respectful. Approachable. Eventually the crowd began thinning. Marcus stepped away from the podium and started gathering his notes. Ethan stood. His heart felt heavier than it had during any professional evaluation or disciplinary review he had ever experienced. He walked across the room slowly. Marcus looked up as he approached. Their eyes met. For a moment neither man spoke. Then Ethan took a breath. Commander Reed. The title felt strange after an entire day of calling him rookie. Marcus offered a small smile. Sergeant Walker. Ethan nodded once. I owe you an apology. Marcus said nothing. He simply listened. Ethan looked toward the floor briefly before continuing. Yesterday I made assumptions about you. More than once. His voice remained steady, but the regret was obvious. I judged you before I knew anything about you. The room around them seemed to fade into the background. Marcus studied him carefully. There was no anger in his expression. No satisfaction. No desire to embarrass him. Only understanding. Ethan exhaled slowly. I should have done better. For the first time since the meeting began, the real test was no longer about authority. It was about character. And Marcus Reed was about to show the entire department what true leadership actually looked like. Marcus Reed was about to show the entire department what true leadership actually looked like. The briefing room had mostly emptied by the time Ethan Walker finished speaking. Small groups of employees continued talking near the exits while city officials met quietly with administrators at the front of the room. Yet for Ethan, the rest of the building seemed to disappear. Only Marcus remained in focus. He had finally said what needed to be said. The apology was honest. The regret was real. Now he waited. Marcus studied him for a moment. Then a small smile appeared on his face. Not the smile of someone enjoying another person's discomfort. The smile of someone who understood how difficult it can be to admit a mistake. Thank you, Sergeant, Marcus said calmly. Ethan nodded. You deserve better than the way I treated you yesterday. Marcus shook his head gently. What I deserve is not the important part. Ethan looked surprised. Marcus continued. The important part is what happens next. Those words immediately shifted the conversation. Ethan expected criticism. Instead, Marcus was already looking toward the future. Every person in this department has made assumptions at some point, Marcus said. I know I have. Ethan frowned slightly. Even you. Marcus laughed softly. Especially me. The answer caught him off guard. Marcus leaned against the edge of the table beside him. Experience does not eliminate mistakes. It teaches us how to learn from them. Ethan absorbed the words quietly. Nearby, several officers had slowed their conversations and were listening without appearing obvious about it. Tyler Brooks stood near the doorway. Linda Perez remained by the records section. Rachel sat at the back of the room organizing paperwork she had already organized twice. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Marcus continued speaking in the same calm voice. Yesterday gave me an opportunity to observe this department honestly. Ethan lowered his eyes. Not exactly our best day. Marcus smiled. Actually, I disagree. Ethan looked up. You do. Marcus nodded. I saw people working hard. I saw officers helping one another. I saw employees trying to solve problems. Were there moments that could have gone better? Of course. But every organization has those moments. The room grew quieter. People were listening now. Marcus looked around at the remaining employees. What matters is whether people are willing to grow. His eyes returned to Ethan. The fact that you came here and apologized tells me more about your character than yesterday ever could. Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest. Not relief exactly. Something deeper. Respect. Real respect. The kind earned rather than demanded. Marcus extended his hand. I would rather work with someone who learns from mistakes than someone who pretends never to make them. Ethan stared at the offered hand for a brief moment before shaking it. The gesture was simple. Yet it seemed to remove the tension that had followed both men since the previous morning. Around the room, several employees smiled quietly. Tyler nodded to himself. Linda finally relaxed for the first time in nearly 24 hours. Marcus released the handshake and glanced toward the rest of the staff. This department does not need perfect people, he said. It needs honest people. People willing to improve. People willing to help one another. No speech about authority. No lecture about rank. No reminder of who was now in charge. Just a simple statement about character. The effect was powerful. Employees who had entered the room expecting a dramatic display of power instead witnessed something far more memorable. Mercy. Understanding. Leadership grounded in humility rather than ego. As conversations slowly resumed, Ethan remained standing beside Marcus. The embarrassment he carried the previous day had not vanished completely, but it no longer controlled him. The lesson had become larger than the mistake. And throughout the department, people were beginning to understand why Marcus Reed had been chosen to lead them. Not because he possessed authority. Because he knew how to use authority without making anyone feel small. Because he knew how to use authority without making anyone feel small. The days that followed brought changes throughout the department, but they were not the dramatic changes many people expected. Marcus Reed did not arrive with a long list of punishments. He did not rearrange offices overnight. He did not spend his first week reminding everyone that he was now the commander. Instead, he listened. He walked through every division. He sat with dispatchers during busy shifts. He spoke with patrol officers before sunrise and detectives long after sunset. He asked questions. He took notes. Most importantly, he remembered names. That simple habit surprised people more than any policy ever could. A week after the announcement, the atmosphere inside the precinct already felt different. Not because procedures had changed, but because people felt seen. Tyler Brooks carried himself with greater confidence. Rachel smiled more often when she crossed the records department. Linda no longer carried the burden of a secret. Even Ethan Walker found himself approaching each shift differently. The lessons of that first day remained with him. One evening, as the sun lowered beyond the city skyline, warm golden light filtered through the large windows overlooking the precinct parking lot. The building had grown quiet. Most officers were already on patrol. Others had gone home to their families. Marcus stood alone in his new office reviewing reports. The office itself was surprisingly modest. A desk, several chairs, a bookshelf, framed photographs of community events. Nothing extravagant. The door remained partially open. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. "Come in," Marcus said. Ethan stepped inside. "Do you have a minute?" Marcus smiled. "Of course." Ethan entered carrying a folder. They discussed several routine matters before the conversation drifted naturally toward the department itself. Looking around the office, Ethan shook his head and laughed softly. "You know, when you walked through those doors that first morning, I thought I had you completely figured out." Marcus smiled. "A lot of people did." Ethan nodded. "Turns out I was wrong." Marcus closed the folder in front of him. "We all get people wrong sometimes." Ethan considered that. The difference is how we respond after we realize it. For a moment neither man spoke. Outside the window, The last sunlight painted the sky with shades of gold and orange. The city seemed calmer from up there. Ethan finally stood. "I am glad you came here." Marcus smiled warmly. "So am I." Ethan nodded once before heading toward the door. Then something simple happened. Something that would have seemed insignificant to anyone watching. He stopped, turned, and stood a little straighter. "Good night, Commander." There was no embarrassment in his voice anymore. No uncertainty. Only genuine respect. Marcus returned the nod. "Good night, Sergeant." Ethan left, and the office became quiet again. Marcus walked toward the window and looked out across the parking lot. Below, officers prepared for another evening of service. Radios crackled softly in the distance. Headlights flickered on as patrol vehicles exited the lot one by one. A week earlier, many of those same people had seen only a uniform and made assumptions. Now they saw something else. Character. Leadership. Humanity. Marcus stood there for a moment longer before turning off the office light. As darkness settled beyond the glass, one truth remained brighter than any title ever could. Real leadership was never about proving power. It was about helping people become better than they were yesterday.